Alright, here's the transmission. We got a stand rigged up. See how this works. Alright, we got our stand rigged up on here. We're going to flip this thing around, get a drain pan under it, and this still got trans fluid in it, right? No. So we should be good. We'll flip it upside down, get the pan off, get our kit out, and get started. Alright, we got it set up here. First thing we're going to do is get rid of this shifter cable bracket. Oh, it came right out. They're usually a pain to get out, and they are coming right out. That's a good sign. So with that off, now we can take the pan bolts off and drop this pan straight down. That thing kind of overlaps inside here, and it makes for a mess. But let's get the pan bolts off, get the pan off, and see how it looks inside. All right, guys, we got the pan off, and as you can see, it's pretty clean inside. We'll drop the filter off. That's where most of the fluid is going to leak out of. All right, guys, we got pan off, of course, flipped upside down. We're getting ready to start on it, and we're going to follow the directions since we're showing you how to do this. So step one, between the X, actually, it looks like we need to pull the valve body. It didn't say that. Let me back up here. So they start the directions with drilling, but it doesn't actually tell you to remove the valve body. All right, so our first step here is going to be get this valve body off. I just threw the directions right in the oil. We're going to unplug all these connectors and be nice and gentle with these. I'll use two hands to do it, but these sometimes get brittle, so don't overextend these clips. So we're going to get this wiring harness unplugged and fold it out of the way. We're going to put a new seal in this too because it looked like it had a tiny bit of seepage. So we're going to go ahead and address that while we're in there. So we'll get the wiring unplugged, laid to the side. We'll get this valve body zipped off. Just a bunch of bolts. Take a picture of this before you even start so you know how everything went. Kind of lay everything, upside down again so you know how everything went. It does have this tube. It's got a retainer here. Once you remove that, it just kind of pulls up out of there. But let's get that far and we'll get you caught back up. All right, we got all our wiring unplugged and moved back. He's going to start removing them. Let's go ahead and remove this first though. So with that retainer off, we'll pull this up and out of the way. Pull that bolt out, this retainer off. I'm going to set that aside, and then we'll be able to wiggle this tube up and out. There we go. We'll swing it to the side here. Now we can get our whole harness flopped over to the side here. He's going to keep removing. I don't think you got to take this off yet. I'm going to go ahead and remove this tube. We're going to set all this inside here. All right, with all the valve body bolts loose, we're going to leave them all in there except for, like, this one had the detent spring for the shifter, and this one had the retainer for that tube. All right, valve body off. This is what it looks like. We have a lot of trapped fluid in here. So for right now, we're going to leave this part alone. We're going to go over here to the valve body. We'll flip this upside down and start our work from there. Again, the first step is drill between the X's, and it shows you here. We need to locate where that is in the valve body. This is the valve body, so it's the underside of the valve body, so we definitely need to flip that over. We probably will have to take all these bolts out and kind of lay them in order. We did mark, obviously, this bolt and this bolt has the retainer for the wiring harness, and we did put a chalk mark on both of those holes. We did take a picture. Definitely do that too. Take a picture so you can remember, and just in case you forget, because you probably will. We got all the bolts removed. Get ready to flip this. This is the pressure manifold. These are 8mm head bolts. These are 10mm. They're all the same length. So the only thing you need to take note is where these wire clips were, and we did put a mark there and there. So let's get this pressure manifold off, and then we can flip this valve body upside down and get to our modification. With those bolts removed, they are also all the same length. They're just different than the rest of them. So you have to pry up a little bit on this, but we have this off. There is some O-rings there. We'll set this aside. Keep all this stuff separate. Now we can flip this valve body upside down and start drilling holes. All right, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. We do have to do a little more disassembly. So we have this flipped upside down. We're gonna remove all of these bolts, set this assembly aside. We can get the divider plate out. All right, so we have all these bolts removed. We're gonna pull this up. We got 2 springs inside. We're gonna take this whole assembly and set it to the side. We do have to do modifications to that. Let's just get rid of our springs also. We'll set them where they go. This is a messy job. So the next step, I think now this divider plate will remove off. If we can get our fingers under here. Yeah. So we're going to pull our divider plate off. We do have a replacement for that, so we don't need this anymore. And then we'll get our bottom gasket off, and we'll get as much of that fluid drained as we can. All right, we have our divider plate removed. We have our bottom gasket, so now you can see all the oil passages. All right, so the very first step, we're actually down to the first step of the directions now. So step 1, drill between the X's on the angle shown with a 125 drill bit. So it gives you this larger picture, but it also shows you the whole valve body. As you can see, we have the valve body oriented the same way. So if we follow this down, it gives you the square block. And if we come over here and transfer, it's actually right here. That's where we're doing our drilling. So we need to drill through this wall, but we need to go down through this space. So you got to drill at an angle, which is fine, but you're just connecting this small passage to this larger passage through that wall. So we have our 1/8 inch drill bit. We're gonna again drill down through an angle. You gotta watch. You should center punch that so it doesn't walk, and you don't want this drill bit to hit this side and mess it up, because it needs to still seal on this side. So we need to drill through here at an angle, not hitting this and going into this cavity. All right, so hopefully you can see that little dot there. That's our center punch. Now we're going to take our drill with the 1/8 inch, like I said, run it through at an angle and get those two connected. All right, so with our drill through there on our 1/8 inch, now we have a 3/16 drill bit chucked up, and we're just gonna use that pilot hole to ream that out to 3/16. All right, step 2, we actually have to, in the side of the valve body, there's a plug with an O-ring. It also has a dowel pin, not a dowel pin, a roll pin. So it's right here. We're going to drive that roll pin out. We'll put a little bit of pressure on that just to make that come out nice and smooth. Once we get that out, we'll pull this whole valve out. And as you can see, there's 2 springs and there's a plunger in there. So once we get all that out, we will put back what they tell us to put back. With that roll pin driven down, now this plunger will, if you push in and out a couple times, the spring should, we can take a screwdriver inside and pop that out. Let's get this slid out. We have our roll pin driven down far enough. All right, with that pulled out, now we can grab that, pull it the rest of the way out, and we have a couple springs in there we'll pull out. There's one, and there's 2 in there somewhere. And the plunger. So let's just flip this up and we'll get all that to slide out. All right, so now we have that plug out, we can get rid of this spring. This spring comes out. There's only 1 spring in there from the factory. We're going to replace it with 2. In this bore, you can get a small screwdriver or punch and work that out until you can grab it with your fingers here, and we'll slip that the whole way out. So with that out, now we'll come over to the directions. We're going to replace with a blue small spring, a blue large spring, and a new end cap, steel end cap with an O-ring in it. All right, so we have everything cleaned up now. We're going to put this valve, or this pin, whatever you call this thing, we're going to put it back in, and we have some options here. For stock shift firmness, we're going to use both of the new blue springs with the new end cap with an O-ring, which are right here. And to adjust shift firmness, we're going to use either the outer blue by itself, makes it slightly firmer, or the inner blue makes it the firmest. So for the build we're going here, we're going to do the firmest. So we're going to put this back together and just use the inner blue, the new, which is the smaller spring, accumulator spring by itself. So we'll put that back in, we'll put the small blue one in, put the end cap, and re-drive our roll pin back on. So this is pretty self-explanatory. We have our valve back in there. We're gonna slip our spring in, making sure we go over the end of that valve. If I can get it on there. Let me get some light here. So that spring goes right in once you get it over the valve. Now we're just gonna take our new end cap with the O-ring. We're gonna push this in, and then we can drive that roll pin back over, and that retains this whole mechanism here. And there's the whole assembly back together. That O-ring's a little bit tight in the bore, so lubricate that, and you might have to tap that in a little bit. But once that's in, the roll pin's on. Now we can move on to the next step. All right, step 3 is there's an accumulator filter parts. It's all right here. It's all, here's the two solenoids. We're working right here. First step is remove this roll pin, and then we'll get these parts out. All right guys, we got our roll pin driven out, and I did notice it does not want to go through this way. It is a through hole, but the bottom of this is smaller, so you need to drive it out up towards you. With the open end of the valve body, it comes up, so you can get your punch through to drive through. It does not tell you that in the directions, but definitely does not go down through. So we have that removed. Now we'll get this end cap out and get the rest of that out. We got to remove an O-ring from a filter. Right, to get that out, this bore, we took our shift shaft out. It just slips out. We'll set that aside, and we can actually push on the back of that filter and push this plug and filter out. All right, we ran into another problem, which it does not tell you in the directions. I don't know if this maybe is something specific to this one for some reason, but as you can see here, we removed this bolt. It's a T27 Torx. This solenoid overlaps this bore, so we couldn't get this end cap to pop out, and that's why. So now we have that. We can actually twist this down, and now this end cap will pop right out. All right, so we got that out. The first step is you actually remove the O-ring from the stock filter. We'll clean this in a second. So we pulled the O-ring off, the stock end cap we're going to throw away. And what we're going to do next is they supply this taper plug with an O-ring. As you can see, it's got a taper on it. It's also got an O-ring. That's going to go in first. The filter is going to go back in, and then there's a spring, an orange spring they supply, and the new end cap actually has a hole down through the center of it, so the roll pin will go down through that center of that. So you have to have this oriented right for that roll pin to drive through that hole. So we have our tapered plug with the O-ring inside there already, and we just pushed it in. It has a point where it stops. We'll take our filter with no O-ring. We'll slip that into the bore. And now we're going to take our orange spring, slip it inside the filter, and then we take our end cap with the hole, drill down through. So now as we put this in there, we need to make sure that hole and that dowel hole line up, and then we'll drive our dowel back down through to hold all this in. All right, so we started assembling this, and the end plug will not go in far enough to get that roll pin. And there is a note here: if end plug will not go in far enough, grinding the outer edge of filter slightly. So we have to take a little bit of material off the end of this filter, just enough so we can get that end plug in and get the roll pin driven back in. So we got that all ground down. You do have to take a fair amount off of that. From what I understand, those filters are different lengths, so you might have to take more, you might have to take less. We got enough off. We got this end plug in, drove our roll pin back in. Now we'll put our bolt back in for our solenoid here, and we'll move on to the next step. Step 4, we're going to actually flip this valve body over. We have this bag out of the pack. We're going to put this plate on, and we need to drill a 3/16 hole. Let's get this flipped over and mocked up. All right, so we have the valve body flipped over. Right here is these two round spots in it. You can see we're referencing off of that. We have our plate here. Trans Go goes up. We're going to put this on, line these two holes up. We're going to drop a valve body bolt down each one of these, and we're going to take the two supplied nuts and lift this up and tighten this plate down with the factory bolts. So we have that mocked up. Our bolts run through. On the back side we have the nuts supplied with the kit. We'll snug them up just ever so slightly and square this plate up. And as you can see on the center hole, they want us to drill a 3/16 hole right down through the valve body. All right, they supply the drill bit for this, and again, it's the center hole, and we're just going to drill straight down through the valve body through that hole. We got that drilled through. If you look on the back side here, it drills right through that cavity there in between the bolts, and this is actually going to be our pressure release valve. Now we need to assemble this whole system. They give you a little needle valve here and a spring and the E-clip. We'll go ahead and pull this back apart, assemble this, and then this will actually go back on as we're assembling the valve body. Not right now, but we do use that as a template to drill the hole, so that's complete now. So we'll take these bolts back out. All right, so once we have this done, we're just going to line this back up. You can put the bolts in there if you need to, and we're going to take a hammer and lightly hit that. That just takes and seats that seat into the hole we just drilled. After that, we can set this aside. So we'll set this over here, and like I said, we'll use that when we reassemble everything. All right, so now we are down to the divider plate, and this is when we're actually going to drill holes in the divider plate. Trans Go supplies a new multi-layer divider plate, and here is where you decide the shift firmness of the transmission. So there's 3 different sizes, actually 4 different sizes we can do. The average is 0.86 diameter hole we're going to drill. For a softer, it's 0.76. For a firm shift, it's 0.96. And for off-road, what they're recommending, off-road use only with a small diameter high-speed stall converter, we're going to drill out to an 1/8 inch or 0.125. So with this one, I think we're going to go firm shifts 0.096, and it tells you exactly which holes to drill here. So we're going to drill holes A, B, and C, which are A, B, C, C being second, B being third, A being fourth. They do reference these Z holes, and that's where you're going to line up your divider gaskets on here. But for right now, we got to decide what hole we're going to drill, what size hole, and then go ahead and drill these holes. All right, so here is when you want to check and double check. We need A, B, and C. We're going to reference this. Locate these. We'll take a marker and mark the holes we're going to drill so we don't keep losing them. But make sure this picture has all the holes in this divider plate. So make sure you're drilling the correct ones. And once we get them marked, we're going to do the 0.96. Like I said, we have it chucked up here already. All right, we marked each one of those holes with an arrow, and we went ahead and drilled them. Our 0.096, So we're good to go as far as that is. Here's the solenoid. And if I pick this up, you can see right through there. So we already are vented. So now we're going to move to the next step. All right, so we're getting ready to start assembling our valve body again. On this part, we took the original green spring out. We'll throw that away. Slipped our white spring in that spot. We're going to reuse this spring. Ours did not have this. It says over here on some models. Ours did not have that, so we don't need that. We're going to put our new gasket on and then reinstall, and we'll tighten those bolts up. Now for reassembly, we're going to put the whole gasket down on the valve body. This gasket is similar, but it does have the cutout for this valve. This whole one down. We're going to just moved it. Line up your bolt holes. We're going to drop the divider plate down on there, and then we're going to take 2 of these holes and line them up on, here's my 2 bolts, on the Z holes. So one here and one here, with this gasket on top. So this gasket goes on top, and then we'll drop our Z hole, one there, bolts through to line both of these gaskets and the divider plate with the valve body. So we have all that laid out, bolts down on the Z holes. Now we're going to take this assembly and drop it back on here, dropping your springs. Make sure everything lines up with the new gasket, which we have slid on there, and then we'll go ahead and tighten all those bolts up in a crisscross pattern. All right, so with this all tightened down, we have our gaskets all lined up. We can pull our Z bolts back out. We'll set them aside. This gasket will stay lined up. The bolt holes as they go through will line that up. Now we're on to the next. All right, so the next step has to deal with the check balls in here. And as you can see, some of these passages have check balls. Normally this would be in the truck or in the car. This would be not upside down. So when we take the valve body off, all the check balls stay in place. We're going to put it back together the same way. So per the directions, they want you to put some grease on here and put the check balls on each one of these spots. And then as you put this back in the transmission, they stay put. With us being upside down, we can just drop the check balls in each one of these passages. Now, one modification we are going to do, we're going to pull the steel check balls out, and we're going to actually use a pack of these from Sonax. They are, I don't know what they're made out of, but they're like plastic check balls, and they seal better and they don't damage the plate and or case over time. So these are a nice upgrade to do also. Not 100% necessary, but we are going to do it. So we'll get our magnet, pull these out and drop these in one at a time, and then we'll be ready for the valve body install, I do believe. When we remove these check balls out one at a time and replace them with the plastic, there is one spot that says no ball. So right here's this cover, right here's this, right kind of directly on top in this passage, there's a check ball. We're going to pull that out and not replace one with that. The rest of these 7 will get replaced with the plastic balls, and we'll drop them right back in the case where they are now. All right, so we have all the balls swapped over and that one left out. So the next step, which is step 7, we're going to install this whole kit here. And this whole thing goes in. It's right here on the directions, but it's right here. It's your boost valve. We need a snap ring pliers. Pull that snap ring and we'll start pulling all these parts out and replacing them with what's in the bag here. All right, so now we're working on our boost valve. We had trouble getting this boost valve out. We knew we were going to do the internal modifications, which is the last step in this process. We got to do a couple, we got to drill a hole here and drill a hole here and replace a snap ring, and there's a few springs to replace. So we pulled the pump out anyway because we knew we had to do that, and we were able to get in behind the boost valve and slip it out. So now we have our boost valve out. Now we can follow the steps here and put it back together. So with the boost valve now out, we disassembled the whole thing. There's a purple spring, there's a white spring, there's a washer, and then this actually goes up inside there. So if you're doing this in the vehicle upside down, all of this is going to kind of fall right out towards you as you disassemble. So with us being on the bench here, we can control this stuff. So we're going to put this back in. This stays. We'll slip this valve back in. With that valve slipped back in, now we have our new springs. So we have, this valve does not, it's the stemless. So no stem. It could be one or two ways. If you do have the stem, then you have to use the spacer that it comes with, which is right there. We do not, so we're not using that. So we'll insert this large green spring, the small purple spring, the washer, the boost valve, and then the snap ring holds it all back together. Again, we're laying flat on the workbench here, so we don't have to worry about all of this falling out. So we can insert that green spring. The purple spring goes inside that one. Our washer goes inside, and then our boost valve, we'll slip that in, and then our snap ring just holds it all back in there. It shows you which order to put it in. It's kind of self-explanatory. The boost valve has an internal piece. The internal piece faces inside. All right, guys, so we're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves just because we already had the pump out and we're doing this whole complete kit. But we did take these bolts out. We split the pump in half. We have our pump over here, the front half. We removed the seal and the drain back hole in the seal, in the front cover for the seal, we need to enlarge to a 1/4 inch and then to a 9/32. We think the directions are saying that. It says 1/4 to 9/32. So if we go to 9/32, we're safe. But let's get at least a 1/4 inch through there and see how it looks, and then we'll go from there. All right, guys, so we haven't cleaned this yet, but as you can see, that really enlarges that hole. It was a tiny hole, now it's a pretty good size hole, and it just ever so slightly touches the edge of that front pump bushing. So we got that drilled. There's one more hole we have to drill, and that's right there at the X. And under the X, drill a 3/64.042 to 0.055 hole through the side of the wall in direction of arrow. So in this cavity right here, we're going to drill through, like diagonally through the sidewall into the other cavity. All right, so this is actually the other half of the pump. The piece that holds the front seal that we just drilled, this is the other half, and this is the part that holds the boost valve. So we're actually in this cavity right here, and we're going to drill through this sidewall into this cavity at an angle. All right, guys, we have the front pump still out, and while we're getting all that cleaned back up, we're going to go ahead and remove this cover. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bolts. Take this cover off, and we got to put a different spring inside. With the cover off, we remove the gasket. We'll pull this housing piston out of the housing here. There's an orange spring inside here. We got our drip pan down here. All right, we have pulled this out. We got our original stock spring, and it does have a note here. It doesn't make sense, but it does say if new spring does not fit, reinstall original. So new spring seems like it fits, so we're going to put this back together just by putting this back inside, and then we'll put our gasket cover back on, retorque those 6 bolts back down. All right, guys, last step before we put our valve body back on is going to be, we change this bolt here, replace it with the stock with this new one from Trans Go. We'll go ahead and tighten it up, and we'll be ready to drop our valve body back on. All right, guys, we got everything cleaned back up, all of our holes drilled that needed to be drilled, and we got the 2 halves of the pump put back together. The last step is we need to tighten all these bolts up before we put this pump back in. But to do that, we have to line the two halves of the case, or the pump case up. So they do make a band tool to do that. We're gonna cheat it and use some worm hose clamps big enough to go around, and we'll just tighten them up to where it levels or centers all that up, both halves, so it splits right here. This half and this half, we did mark this when we took it apart, so both marks are lined up. We'll put that clamp covering both sides, tighten it up. We know we're centered up. We'll go ahead and torque our bolts down, and the pump will be ready to go back into the transmission. All right, guys, since we're upside down, we're down to putting the valve body back on. We got our gasket on. Now it's time to grab the valve body, and I'll put that down. We'll get a couple bolts started and then finish it up with the rest. All right, we have our valve body placed on. Some of these bolts started to line everything. Our pressure manifolds sitting here. These take different bolts. The rest of the valve body bolts are the same. We do have that plate, the Trans Go pressure release plate. Trans Go is going to go up. It's also going to kind of hang over the valve body. Here is the needle seat, and that's going to go right over that hole we just drilled. It is spring loaded, so we'll take two of our bolts and drop down through here. And once we get those started and tighten them up, that'll position that just like that. So we're going to go ahead and get the rest of our bolts in, get everything snugged up. We'll get this pressure manifold tightened down too. Like I said, it's got different bolts. They're 8mm. The rest of them are 10mm. We'll get our wiring harness put back over, and we did mark on here, which I don't see now, our marks, but we did take a picture of this. So there is wiring harness tabs, and we'll make sure we get them in the correct spot. It should be self-explanatory. Once we flop this harness over, we should see exactly where to run it. The other thing to watch as you put your valve body back on, make sure you have your shifter selector shaft slid back in, and make sure you line it up with this groove here. As you can see, that's lined up, and that moves when your shifter shaft moves. So this is why we take a picture. As you can see, we can just match everything right back up. We do have, here's the detent spring. We did get it put back on for the shifter mechanism. And we have this tube to go back in, goes from there over, and it does have a retaining clip, and then the two clips that have the retaining clips for the wiring harness. But we got a picture, so we'll get that done. I'll show you how it looks on the final. All right, guys, we're completely done with the shift kit. The only thing left to do is put the new filter on and the pan back on. Other than that, it's completed. It's a little time consuming, not really difficult. Honestly, the directions aren't the best, but if you take your time, read over them a couple times, as you do it, you'll understand what they mean. So there it is.